The moment you discover your entire marriage is built on lies, it feels like dying while still breathing. My name is Hazel Whitaker, and I'm 79 years old now. But in 1973, I was just a 27-year-old mother of three, living what I believed was the American dream in a little town called Meadow Creek, New Mexico. Before I share my story with you today, I'd love if you could take a moment to subscribe to this channel and give this video a like. It would mean the world to me. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you what happened all those years ago. I've held this story close to my heart for decades, but some stories need to be told, no matter how much they hurt. Maybe it will help someone else know they're not alone in their darkest hour. That's what I needed back then. To know I wasn't alone. It was early June, and the heat had already settled over our town like a heavy blanket. The kind of dry heat that makes the horizon shimmer and the cicadas sing louder than usual. Our modest ranch-style house on Saguaro Drive was my pride and joy. James had bought it for us when he got promoted at the mining company 5 years earlier. It had a covered porch where I'd sit in the evenings while the children played in the yard, and a kitchen with those fashionable yellow appliances that all the ladies in my neighborhood envied. James and I met after he returned from Vietnam. He was so handsome in his uniform, with those kind blue eyes that seemed to see right through to my soul. We were married within 6 months, and I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Our first child, David, came along a year later in '67, then Sarah in '69, and finally our little Rebecca in '71. We were that picture-perfect family you'd see in magazine advertisements. James with his steady job, me keeping a beautiful home, and our 3 healthy, beautiful children. That Tuesday morning was like any other. James kissed me goodbye, straightened his tie, and headed off to work with his briefcase in hand. He mentioned having to travel to Albuquerque for a few days for business, something about a new mining equipment contract. These trips had become more frequent over the past year or so, but I never questioned them. James was a provider, always working hard for our family. That's what husbands did back then. I spent the morning cleaning the house and preparing a casserole for the church potluck that evening. With James away, I thought I'd take the opportunity to sort through his closet and donate some of his older suits to the church charity drive. That's when I found the receipt. It was tucked in the pocket of his tweed jacket, a receipt from Sanderson's Jewelers in Santa Fe, dated just 2 weeks earlier, for a woman's bracelet with a heart charm. My birthday had been 3 months ago, and our anniversary wasn't for another 5 months. I stood there, clutching that small piece of paper, trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Perhaps it was for his mother, or his secretary as a thank you gift. But deep down, a voice I didn't want to hear whispered that something wasn't right. I put the receipt back and tried to forget about it. But over the next few days, other small things I had ignored started to surface in my memory. The late-night phone calls that he took in his study with the door closed, the new cologne he had started wearing, the way he seemed distracted at dinner, often asking me to repeat things I'd just said. When James returned from his trip, I watched him closely. He brought souvenirs for the children, as he always did, a small carved wooden horse for David, a turquoise hair clip for Sarah, and a little rag doll for Rebecca. He seemed the same loving father and husband he'd always been. But now I was noticing things, like how he checked his watch more often than usual, and how his stories about the business meetings had fewer details than they used to. A week later, he announced another trip to Albuquerque. This time, something inside me snapped. I needed to know the truth. After dropping the children at school the next morning, I did something I never thought I would do. I drove to the mining company office. I told myself I was just going to surprise James with lunch before his trip. The receptionist, a young woman named Betty who had attended our Christmas party last year, looked startled to see me. "Mrs. Whitaker, what a lovely surprise," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I was hoping to catch James before he leaves for Albuquerque," I said, trying to sound casual. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Mr. Whitaker isn't scheduled for any business trips this week, Mrs. Whitaker." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "There must be some mistake," I managed to say. "He mentioned a meeting in Albuquerque today." Betty glanced nervously at the office door behind her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitaker, but Mr. Whitaker called in this morning saying he was working from home today due to some paperwork he needed to finish. I thanked her and left quickly, my face burning with embarrassment and a growing sense of dread. James had lied. He wasn't at work, and he wasn't at home. So where was he? I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities, each worse than the last. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed James's car was indeed gone. He had left early that morning, kissing me goodbye, telling me he'd call from Albuquerque that evening. With shaking hands, I went to our bedroom and opened his nightstand drawer. I found his address book and flipped through it, not sure what I was looking for until I saw it. An address in Santa Fe, written in his neat handwriting under the name VM, with a telephone number beside it. No explanation, just an address that I'd never seen before. Santa Fe was only an hour's drive away. Before I could talk myself out of it, I called my neighbor Alice and asked if she could pick up the children from school and watch them until dinner. I told her I had a doctor's appointment I'd forgotten about, another lie to add to the growing stack of deceptions that seemed to be engulfing my life. The drive to Santa Fe was a blur. I rehearsed confrontations in my head, imagining scenarios where James had a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. Maybe it was a surprise he was planning. Maybe it was a business contact he hadn't mentioned. Maybe. But the knot in my stomach tightened with every mile. I found the address easily enough, a charming adobe-style house with bright blue trim and flower boxes in the windows. It was in a nice neighborhood, the kind where young families lived. I parked across the street, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. I didn't have to wait long. Just after noon, a familiar car pulled into the driveway, James's Buick. I sank down in my seat, watching as my husband, the father of my children, walked up to that front door with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. He didn't knock. He had a key. The door opened and a woman appeared. She was younger than me, maybe by 5 or 6 years, with dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders. She was wearing a pretty floral dress that showed off her figure, a figure that clearly indicated she was expecting a baby. She threw her arms around James's neck and kissed him, not a friendly peck, but the kiss of a lover, a wife. My husband returned the kiss with equal passion, his hand resting on her swollen belly with a tenderness I recognized all too well. What happened next was even worse. A little boy, no more than 3 years old, came running to the door calling out, "Daddy! Daddy!" James scooped him up and held him high, both of them laughing. The little boy had James's eyes. My James. The man I had built my entire life around. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a cry, because suddenly James looked in my direction. Our eyes met across the street, and I watched as his face drained of color. For a long, suspended moment, we stared at each other. Me in my car, with my white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, him standing on that doorstep with his other family. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I started the car and drove away, tears blinding me. I had to pull over twice to be sick on the side of the road. My mind couldn't process what I had seen. James had another home, another woman who was clearly his wife in every way that mattered. A son who called him daddy, another baby on the way. How long had this been going on? Years, obviously, given the age of the little boy. I drove back to Meadow Creek in a state of shock. When I got home, I mechanically started preparing dinner, as if following the routine of normal life could somehow make what I had witnessed less real. I picked up the children from Alice's house, helped them with their homework, listened to their stories about school, all while feeling like I was underwater, sounds muffled, movements slow and dreamlike. When the phone rang at 6 o'clock, I knew it was James. I let it ring 5 times before answering. "Hazel," he said, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "We need to talk." "Do we?" My own voice sounded strange to my ears, calm and detached. "I can explain," he said. "Can you explain the little boy who calls you daddy?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to remain calm. "Can you explain the pregnant woman? The house you've clearly been paying for? The years of lies?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Hazel, please, let me come home. We should talk about this face to face." "There's nothing left to talk about," I said. "Don't come home tonight, James. I can't look at you right now." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing. The children were in the living room watching television, their innocent laughter occasionally drifting through the house. They had no idea their world was about to change forever. How would I tell them? What would I say? That their father had another family? That everything we thought we knew about our lives was a lie? That night, after tucking the children into bed with stories and kisses, as if it were any other evening, I finally allowed myself to break down. I sat on the bathroom floor with a towel pressed against my mouth to muffle my sobs. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for my children who adored their father. I cried for the woman I had been just that morning, trusting, secure in her place in the world. And yes, I even cried for the woman in Santa Fe who might be just as deceived as I had been. By morning, the tears were gone, replaced by a cold determination. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't stay in this house, in this town, waiting for James to choose between his two families. I had to make a choice for myself and my children, a choice to walk away with whatever dignity I had left. You never truly understand your own strength until being strong is the only choice you have left. That night, after discovering James's secret life, I didn't sleep a wink. I lay beside him in our bed, the same bed we'd shared for 9 years, listening to his breathing, studying the face of a man I suddenly realized was a complete stranger to me. He had come home late that evening, reeking of cologne and excuses. He claimed his business in Albuquerque had wrapped up early, so he'd decided to surprise us by coming home. The children were delighted, of course. They'd tackled him at the door with hugs and eager stories about their day. I watched him with them, so loving, so attentive, and wondered how a man could compartmentalize his life so completely. How could he be a devoted father to our children while having another child across town who also called him Daddy? Throughout dinner, I kept my composure. I smiled at the right moments, nodded when appropriate, even laughed at his jokes. But inside, I was dying. Every glance, every gesture now seemed calculated, every word potentially another lie. Who was this man sitting across from me, cutting his meatloaf into neat squares the way he always did? Had anything about our life together been real? After the children were tucked into bed, he approached me in the kitchen. I was washing dishes, my hands submerged in soapy water, trying to steady myself with the familiar routine. "Hazel," he said quietly, "we need to talk about what happened today." I kept my eyes on the plate I was scrubbing. "Do we?" I think I saw everything I needed to see. "It's not what you think," he started, but I cut him off with a harsh laugh. "Really, James? It's not what I think? I saw you with another woman, pregnant, I might add, and a little boy who is clearly yours. What exactly am I misunderstanding?" He sighed, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. "Valerie and I, it's complicated." "Valerie," I repeated. "VM in your address book, at least now I know her name." I won't repeat the entire conversation that followed. Some words, once spoken, leave wounds too deep to revisit. The short version is that James had met Valerie Martinez during a business trip to Santa Fe 5 years ago. What started as a brief affair turned into something more when she discovered she was pregnant. Instead of ending things, instead of coming clean, James had decided to maintain 2 separate lives. 2 women who believed they were his wife, 2 families who depended on him. "I love you both," he had the audacity to say. "I couldn't bear to hurt either of you. So instead, you built a foundation of lies," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm despite the storm raging inside me. "And now, 3 innocent children, 4 soon, will pay the price for your selfishness." He tried to touch my arm, but I recoiled as if burned. "Don't," I warned him. "Don't you dare touch me." That night, as I mentioned, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, making calculations. James had been supporting 2 households for years. No wonder money had always been tight, despite his good position at the mining company. No wonder he was always working late, always traveling. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't stay in Meadow Creek, not with the inevitable scandal that would erupt once the truth came out. Small towns feast on tragedy and scandal. It would be all anyone talked about for years. Poor Hazel Whitaker, did you hear? Her husband had a whole other family in Santa Fe. Can you imagine? I couldn't subject my children to that kind of whispered cruelty. David was already a sensitive boy at 6. Sarah, at 4, was just developing her self-confidence. And little Rebecca, at barely 2, wouldn't understand why people were looking at her mother with pity in their eyes. I had an aunt, my mother's sister, Ruth, who lived in Tucson, Arizona. We weren't particularly close, but she had always told me to visit anytime. Anytime was now. After James left for work, I called Aunt Ruth from the telephone in the kitchen, twisting the cord around my finger nervously as it rang. "Aunt Ruth," I said when she answered, "it's Hazel. I need a place to stay for a while. Me and the children." There was a pause. "Hazel, honey, what's happened?" I couldn't bring myself to explain over the phone. "I'll tell you everything when I see you. But we need to leave today. Is that all right?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Of course it's all right. Your family." Those 4 words, "your family," nearly broke me right there. Real family doesn't lie to you for years on end. Real family doesn't betray you in the most fundamental way possible. I hung up and sprang into action. I withdrew half the money from our joint savings account at the bank. My fair share after 9 years of marriage, I reasoned. Then I went home and packed only what would fit in our station wagon. Clothes, a few toys, photo albums, though I left behind all the photos of James, and my grandmother's silver tea set, the only real valuable I had inherited. I picked the children up early from school and the neighbor watching Rebecca, telling them we were going on a surprise trip to visit a great aunt they barely remembered. David, always perceptive, asked about Daddy. "Daddy has to work," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "He knows we're going." I left a note for James on the kitchen table. It wasn't eloquent or particularly insightful. It simply said, "I cannot share a husband. Do not try to find us. The children deserve better than a part-time father." The drive to Tucson was long and grueling with 3 young children. Rebecca cried for most of the first hour, not understanding why we were leaving home. Sarah kept asking when we'd return. Only David remained quiet, staring out the window at the passing desert landscape, occasionally glancing at me with questions in his eyes that I wasn't ready to answer. We stopped at a motel in Las Cruces for the night. As the children finally slept, exhausted from the day's upheaval, I sat on the edge of the bathtub in our cramped motel bathroom and allowed myself to cry for the first time. Not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that I muffled with a towel so the children wouldn't hear. What kind of woman doesn't realize her husband has another family? How could I have been so blind, so trusting, so stupid? The signs had been there. The business trips, the late nights, the unexplained expenses. I had ignored them all because I wanted to believe in the life we had built together. But dwelling on my failures wouldn't help my children. They needed me to be strong, to create a new life for us. So I dried my tears, splashed cold water on my face, and made a promise to myself. I would never again let my happiness depend on a man. I would become the kind of woman my daughters could look up to, independent, resilient, and whole on her own. We arrived at Aunt Ruth's modest bungalow the next afternoon. Her neighborhood in Tucson was nothing like our neighborhood in Meadow Creek. The houses were smaller, closer together, with desert landscaping instead of green lawns. But there was something honest about the place. No pretensions, no keeping up appearances. Aunt Ruth welcomed us with open arms and no questions, at least not in front of the children. She had prepared her spare bedroom for us, with a double bed for me and Rebecca, and sleeping bags on the floor for David and Sarah. It was cramped but clean, and most importantly, it was safe. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat with Aunt Ruth at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I told her everything, finding the receipt, following James to Santa Fe, discovering Valerie and their son. The worst part, I confessed, is that I still love him. Isn't that pathetic? After everything he's done, part of me still loves the man I thought he was. Aunt Ruth reached across the table and took my hand in hers. Her skin was weathered from years working in her garden under the Arizona sun, but her grip was strong. "That doesn't make you pathetic, Hazel. It makes you human. You gave that man your heart for 9 years. Those feelings don't disappear overnight." "What am I going to do?" I whispered. "I have 3 children, no job, no home of my own. I dropped out of college to marry James. I don't have any real skills. She squeezed my hand. Now you listen to me. You are stronger than you know. You had the courage to leave, to protect your children from living in a house built on lies. That kind of strength doesn't come from nowhere. But, no buts, she interrupted firmly. You can stay here as long as you need to. Get your bearings. Figure out your next steps. And when you're ready, I'll help you find work. I slept that night. Really slept. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal. It wasn't that my pain had lessened, or that my fears for the future had disappeared. But something Aunt Ruth said had resonated with me. I had found the courage to leave. That kind of strength doesn't come from nowhere. The first week in Tucson was a blur of explaining to my confused children why we weren't going home, helping them adjust to sharing a small bedroom, and trying to figure out what came next. I avoided James's daily phone calls to Aunt Ruth's house, though she told me he sounded desperate, pleading for me to talk to him. He made his choice years ago, I told her. He chose to live a lie. By the second week, I knew we couldn't impose on Aunt Ruth indefinitely. Her house wasn't meant for 3 active children, and her patience, while considerable, wasn't limitless. I needed to find work, but what could I do? I'd been a housewife for 9 years. My only skills were cooking, cleaning, and managing a household budget. Then I remembered my sewing. Before marrying James, I'd worked briefly at a dress shop, altering clothes and occasionally designing simple dresses for customers. My mother had taught me to sew when I was just a girl, and I had made many of my own clothes over the years, as well as dresses for Sarah and Rebecca. There's a fabric store downtown that has a "Help Wanted" sign in the window, Aunt Ruth mentioned casually one evening. The owner, Margaret Wilson, is a friend from my garden club. I may have mentioned that my niece is quite talented with a needle and thread. I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. Do you think she'd hire me? Even with 3 children? Aunt Ruth smiled. Only one way to find out. The next day, I put on my best dress, a navy blue A-line I'd made myself, and walked into Wilson's Fabrics and Notions with my heart in my throat. Mrs. Wilson was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, but her eyes softened when I mentioned Aunt Ruth. "Ruth speaks very highly of your skills," she said, examining me over the tops of her reading glasses. "Do you have any samples of your work?" I hadn't thought to bring any. "Just what I'm wearing," I said, gesturing to my dress. "I made it last spring." Mrs. Wilson circled me slowly, examining the seams, the darts, the hand-stitched hem. "Not bad," she finally said. "But talk is cheap. Can you fix this?" She pulled out a man's suit jacket with a torn lining and a missing button. I took it from her, examining the damage. I'd need to match the thread to the existing stitching, replace the lining at the tear rather than just patching it, and find a button that matches the others perfectly, I said. Otherwise, the repair will be obvious. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You have a good eye. When can you start?" Just like that, I had a job. Part-time at first, mornings while the children were at their new school, and Rebecca stayed with Aunt Ruth. The pay wasn't much, but it was a start. It was independence. That evening, as I tucked the children into bed in our cramped shared room, David asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are we ever going to see Daddy again?" I sat on the edge of the bed, choosing my words carefully. Daddy made some very bad choices that hurt our family. Right now, we need time away from him to heal. "But he's still our daddy," Sarah insisted, her lower lip trembling. "Yes, he is," I acknowledged, "and he loves you very much. That hasn't changed." It was the kindest truth I could offer them. As I turned out the light, Rebecca, who rarely spoke in full sentences at her age, said clearly in the darkness, "Mama sad." I reached out to stroke her soft curls. "Mama was sad," I corrected gently, "but I'm getting stronger every day." "And do you know why?" "Why?" David and Sarah asked in unison. "Because I have the 3 of you, and we're going to be just fine." I didn't know then how we would manage long-term. I didn't know if James would try to fight for custody or if he would simply let us go. I didn't know if the whispers and stares would follow us to this new city, or if we could truly start fresh. But I knew one thing for certain. The woman who drove away from Meadow Creek was not the same woman who had lived there for 9 years. That woman had believed her worth was tied to her husband. This new version of me was discovering, day by day, her own capacity for resilience. And though I couldn't see it yet, this painful ending was actually the beginning of a life more authentic and fulfilling than anything I could have imagined. There's a unique kind of humiliation that comes with returning to the place where your life fell apart. After 3 months in Tucson, I had to face the reality that we couldn't stay with Aunt Ruth indefinitely. Her small bungalow wasn't designed for a family of 4, and despite her generous spirit, I could see the strain our presence was putting on her routine. But more pressing was the legal reality I'd been avoiding. I needed to officially divorce James, which meant returning to New Mexico. The money I'd taken when we left was nearly gone. My part-time job at Wilson's Fabrics barely covered our basic needs, and Aunt Ruth was on a fixed income. I'd been dodging James's calls for weeks, but finally, I had no choice but to answer. "Hazel." He sounded both relieved and anxious when he heard my voice. "Thank God. Please, just listen. I'm coming back to Meadow Creek," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not to reconcile. To file for divorce and settle things properly." There was a long silence. Then, "I understand. The children need stability," I continued. "A home of their own, not a crowded spare bedroom." "You can have the house," he said quickly. "I'm living in Santa Fe now, with—" He trailed off. "With your other family," I finished for him. "You can say it, James. It's been our reality for years, even if I only discovered it recently. That we worked out the practical details. He would continue paying the mortgage on our house in Meadow Creek, provide child support, and make himself scarce when I returned to town. It was the least he could do, and even he knew it. What neither of us discussed was how the town would react to my return. In 1973, divorce was becoming more common, but in small-town New Mexico, it still carried a stigma. And a divorce caused by a husband's secret second family? That was the kind of scandal that would have the gossip mill working overtime. The drive back to Meadow Creek in early September was very different from our hasty escape months earlier. The children were excited to return to familiar surroundings, to their own rooms and toys, to the friends they'd left behind. Only David seemed to sense my apprehension, reaching from the back seat occasionally to pat my shoulder, as if our roles had somehow reversed. "It's okay, Mom," he said as we passed the town limit sign. "We'll be okay," from the mouths of babes, as they say. Our house on Saguaro Drive looked exactly as we'd left it, right down to the half-dead potted geranium on the front porch that I'd forgotten to water before our abrupt departure. James had kept his word. The place was clean, the refrigerator stocked, and a stack of mail neatly arranged on the kitchen counter. There was no sign of him, except a brief note. "I'm staying at the El Dorado Hotel in Santa Fe if you need anything. Joey." That first night back in our home was surreal. The children fell into their old routines easily, but I wandered from room to room feeling like a visitor. This house contained so many memories: Christmases around the fireplace, birthday parties in the backyard, quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset. But now each happy memory was tainted by the knowledge that during those same years, James had been creating parallel memories with another woman and child across town. I slept in the guest bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bed I'd shared with James. Not anymore. The next morning, I dropped the children at school and drove to Peterson and McKinley, the only law firm in Meadow Creek. Frank Peterson had handled the closing when we bought our house. Now he would handle its transfer to my name alone, along with the divorce proceedings. As I parked outside the small brick building on Main Street, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had lost weight in the past months, and there were new lines around my eyes, but there was something else too. A determination that hadn't been there before. The woman staring back at me wasn't just James Whitaker's wife anymore. She was Hazel, finding her own way. The whispers started the moment I walked into the office. The receptionist, Linda Barnes, who used to invite us to her annual Memorial Day barbecue, paused mid-sentence on the telephone when she saw me. I heard her whisper, "She's back," to whoever was on the line before quickly composing herself. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said with forced brightness. "How nice to see you again." Mr. Peterson kept me waiting for 45 minutes, despite having an appointment. When I was finally shown into his office, his usual jovial manner was subdued. "Hazel," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I was sorry to hear about your situation." So the news had spread. Of course it had. Meadow Creek had barely 3,000 residents. News traveled faster than tumbleweeds in a windstorm. "Thank you, Frank," I replied, my chin held high. "I'd like to file for divorce on grounds of adultery, and I'll need papers drawn up transferring the house to my name." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Are you sure you want to cite adultery? It's rather public. Irreconcilable differences would be more discreet. James has another family in Santa Fe," I said flatly. "A 5-year-old son and a newborn baby, based on the last time I saw his partner. There's nothing discreet about the situation." Frank's eyebrows shot up despite his attempt at professional detachment. "I see," he murmured, scribbling on his legal pad. "Well, New Mexico is actually a no-fault divorce state now, so I understand," I cut him off. "But I want the record to show the truth. My children will hear whispers. I want them to know their mother stood up for herself." To his credit, Frank nodded. "I'll draw up the papers." That conversation was just the beginning. When I left the law office, I decided to stop at Burton's grocery to pick up a few things for dinner. The store fell silent when I walked in. Mrs. Burton, who used to slip extra penny candy to my children, suddenly became very interested in arranging a display of canned peaches. 2 women in the produce section bent their heads together, whispering behind a head of lettuce. A man I recognized as James's colleague from the mining company saw me and abruptly turned down another aisle. It was as if I had a scarlet letter pinned to my chest. Not A for adultery, but V for victim, which somehow seemed worse. Their pitying glances made me feel small, diminished. I grabbed what I needed and approached the checkout, where Judy Miller, a woman I'd served alongside on the PTA, was working the register. "Hazel," she said, her voice hushed as if at a funeral. "We've all been so worried about you. Just disappeared like that with the children." "We needed some time away," I said simply, counting out exact change. "Such a shame," she continued, bagging my groceries with excruciating slowness. "And after everything you did for this community. The spring fundraiser won't be the same without your organization skills." The implications were clear. My role in the community was over. The divorcee with the scandalous story wouldn't be asked to chair committees or organize bake sales anymore. "I'm sure you'll manage," I replied, taking my bags. As the days passed, similar scenes played out across town. The mothers at school pickup stood in their usual circles, conversations stopping abruptly when I approached. Invitations to birthday parties for my children came less frequently. Our usual pew at church remained empty for weeks after our return. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting through a sermon on family values while feeling everyone's eyes on my back. The worst was when Sarah came home crying because Bethany Palmer had told her that her daddy didn't love them anymore. That's why he had a new family. "Is it true, Mommy?" she asked, her small face streaked with tears. "Did Daddy get new kids because he didn't want us anymore?" I gathered her in my arms, my heart breaking for the millionth time. "No, sweetheart. Daddy made bad choices, but he loves you, David, and Rebecca very much. Some people just don't understand grown-up problems, so they say unkind things." It wasn't just the children who faced cruelty. One afternoon, I went to the bank to open my own account, something I should have done years ago. The bank manager, Harold Jenkins, a man who had played golf with James every Saturday for years, kept me waiting for nearly an hour before seeing me. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, when I was finally seated across from his imposing desk. "What can I do for you today?" "I'd like to open an account in my name only," I explained, "and discuss the possibility of a small business loan in the future." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "A business loan? What sort of business would that be?" "I'm still developing the concept," I said. "But it would be related to custom dressmaking and alterations." Harold's eyebrows rose. "I see. And what collateral would you have for such a loan?" "The house will be in my name once the divorce is finalized." His expression hardened. "Mrs. Whitaker, I hope you understand that the bank has certain standards for loans. A newly divorced woman with 3 children and no business experience represents a significant risk." "A risk?" I repeated, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "I've managed my household budget perfectly for 9 years. I have skills that are in demand, and I'll have the house as collateral. Perhaps you should consider something more suitable," he suggested. "The elementary school is looking for a receptionist, or the telephone company always needs operators." I stood up, gathering my purse. Thank you for your time, Mr. Jenkins. I'll be withdrawing all my funds and closing my joint account today. I believe the First Bank of Albuquerque will be more appreciative of my business. His face reddened. Now, Hazel, don't be hasty. It's Mrs. Whitaker to you, I corrected him. And I'm not being hasty, I'm being prudent with my financial future. I walked out with my head high, but inside I was shaking. This was the reality of my new life. Doors that had once been open to James Whitaker's wife were now firmly closed to Hazel Whitaker, soon-to-be divorcee. The following weeks brought more of the same. The invitation to join the Christmas decoration committee, which I'd chaired for the past 3 years, never arrived. The bridge club suddenly had no openings. Even Dr. Matthews, our family physician since David was born, seemed uncomfortable during the children's checkups, rushing through the appointments and avoiding personal questions. But not everyone in town turned their back on us. Mrs. Wilson, my former high school English teacher, stopped me outside the post office one day. Hazel, she said warmly, grasping both my hands in hers, I've been meaning to call. Would you and the children like to come for Sunday dinner this weekend? I nearly cried at this simple act of kindness. We'd love to. Gradually, a small circle of support emerged. Mrs. Wilson and her husband, the new young minister at the Presbyterian church who called to check if we needed anything. Surprisingly, Frank Peterson's wife, Emily, who dropped off a casserole one evening with a note that simply said, "Been there. It gets better." Then there was Dorothea Martinez, who owned the town's only dress shop, a tiny place called Dorothy's Designs, tucked between the hardware store and the barber shop on Main Street. I had ventured in one day, hoping to find fabric that wasn't available at the general store. Dorothea was a widow in her 50s who had taken over her husband's tailoring business after his death 10 years earlier, transforming it into a modest but successful dress shop. She recognized me immediately. "You're Hazel Whitaker." I braced myself for the usual pity or judgment, but instead she smiled. "I heard you make your own clothes. That blue dress you're wearing, your work?" Surprised, I nodded. "Yes, I made it last spring." She circled me, examining the seams and darts with a professional eye. Beautiful top stitching. Not many people take the time for hand-finished hems anymore. For the first time in months, someone was seeing me, really seeing me, not as poor Hazel or James's abandoned wife, but as a person with skills and value. "Thank you," I said, feeling a genuine smile break through. Dorothea tilted her head, considering me. "I could use some help around here, especially with holiday alterations coming up. My fingers aren't as nimble as they used to be. Any interest in part-time work?" It seemed too good to be true. Yes, I would be very interested." The pay isn't much," she warned, "and the hours would have to work around your children's schedules." "That's perfect," I assured her. As I left the shop that day, I felt a weight lifting. Yes, there were closed doors and whispers following me around Meadow Creek. Yes, former friends crossed the street to avoid talking to me. But there were also unexpected kindnesses and new opportunities emerging from the wreckage of my old life. That evening, as I tucked the children into bed, David asked, "Are we going to stay in Meadow Creek forever, Mom?" I hesitated, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I don't know, sweetheart. Would you like to?" He thought for a moment. "I miss my friends, but I don't like how people talk about you when they think I can't hear. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. We'll stay as long as it feels right," I told him. "And if someday it doesn't feel right anymore, we'll go somewhere new. But for now, we have our house, you have your school, and Mommy has a new job." "At the dress shop?" he asked, his eyes lighting up. "Can you make me a superhero cape?" I laughed, the sound surprising me with its genuineness. "I'll make you the best superhero cape in all of New Mexico." As I switched off his light, I realized something important. The whispers and closed doors hurt, yes. The judgment and pity stung. But they didn't define me. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, I was starting to see a path forward that wasn't just about survival, but about building something new. The women of Meadow Creek might whisper about me at the beauty parlor. The men might shake their heads at the golf course, but I was still standing. And as Dorothea had shown me that day, if one door closes, sometimes a window opens instead. You just have to be brave enough to climb through it. Sometimes your greatest talent lies dormant within you, waiting for the right moment to emerge. My mother used to say that necessity is the mother of invention, but in my case, necessity became the mother of reinvention. Working at Dorothea's dress shop turned out to be more than just a job. It was the beginning of discovering who I truly was beyond being a wife and mother. The holiday season of 1973 was approaching fast, and with it came a flood of alteration requests at Dorothy's Designs. Women bringing in dresses that needed taking in or letting out for Christmas parties, mothers wanting matching outfits for family photos, men needing suits adjusted for New Year's celebrations. I spent hours at the old Singer sewing machine in the back room, my fingers flying over fabrics, creating perfect invisible hems, adjusting waistlines and replacing zippers. Dorothea watched me work with an appraising eye. "You have a gift, Hazel," she said one afternoon as I finished a particularly challenging alteration on a beaded evening gown. "You see the potential in things. Not everyone has that vision." Her words warmed something inside me that had been cold for months. I had spent so long seeing myself through the lens of my failed marriage, discarded, not good enough, that I'd forgotten I had value beyond that relationship. One Wednesday in early December, a young woman named Lisa Jenkins came into the shop in tears. She was holding a wedding dress that had been her mother's, hoping to wear it for her own wedding that weekend. "The seamstress in Albuquerque was supposed to alter it, but she got sick," Lisa explained between sobs. "The wedding is Saturday, and no one else can help me on such short notice." The dress was at least 20 years old, a beautiful satin gown with delicate lace overlay that had yellowed slightly with time. It needed significant alterations. Lisa was taller and slimmer than her mother had been. Dorothea looked at me questioningly. We were already swamped with holiday orders, but there was something about the desperation in Lisa's eyes that resonated with me. I knew what it felt like to have plans crumble, to feel helpless in the face of circumstances beyond your control. "I can do it," I heard myself say. "But we'll need to work quickly. Can you stay for a fitting right now?" For the next 3 days, I worked on that dress into the night after the children were asleep. I carefully separated the lace overlay from the satin bodice, soaked the lace in a special solution to restore its ivory color, restructured the bodice to Lisa's measurements, and lowered the waistline to elongate the silhouette. I replaced yellowed seed pearls with new ones, meticulously matching the original pattern. When Lisa came for the final fitting on Friday afternoon, her hands flew to her mouth when she saw the transformed dress. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Even better than I imagined." As she stood on the fitting platform, looking at herself in the mirror, I caught Dorothea watching me with an odd expression. "What?" I asked when Lisa had gone, clutching the dress carefully in its garment bag. "You didn't just alter that dress," Dorothea said thoughtfully. "You reimagined it, made it more beautiful than the original, while still honoring what it was." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what was needed." "No," she insisted. "What was needed was to take it in at the waist and shorten the hem. What you did was art." That night, as I sat at my kitchen table paying bills, I found myself sketching dress designs on the back of an envelope, something I hadn't done since before marrying James. My mind was suddenly full of ideas, silhouettes, and details I wanted to try. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of excitement about the future. Word spread quickly about Lisa's wedding dress. In a small town like Meadow Creek, news, both good and bad, traveled at the speed of sound. Within weeks, we had women coming into Dorothy's specifically asking for me. Not just for alterations, but wondering if I could create custom designs. "Have you ever thought about making your own pieces to sell in the shop?" Dorothea asked one day in January as we were closing up. "I have extra fabric from suppliers, and there's space in the front corner for a small rack." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. "Do you really think people would buy them?" "Only one way to find out," she replied with a smile. I started small, a rack of simple A-line skirts in vibrant colors and patterns not usually found in Meadow Creek's limited shopping options. To my surprise, they sold out within 2 weeks. Next came blouses with special details, hand-embroidered collars, unique button arrangements, perfect French seams. Those sold quickly, too. By spring, I had developed a small but dedicated clientele who appreciated the quality and uniqueness of my work. Women who had previously avoided eye contact with me in the grocery store were now stopping by the shop to see what new items I had created. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a shift. They were beginning to see me as something other than just the woman whose husband had a secret family. What I didn't anticipate was how this creative outlet would heal something broken inside me. Each stitch was a tiny act of creation, a small assertion that I could make something beautiful and lasting. Each completed garment was proof that my hands still knew how to build, even if my heart was still learning how to trust again. The children noticed the change in me. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, sketching designs after dinner, Sarah leaned against my shoulder. "You hum now when you draw," she observed. "You didn't used to hum." I hadn't realized I was doing it. "Do you like my humming?" She nodded solemnly. "It means you're happy again." Out of the mouths of babes. By summer, I had saved enough from my work at Dorothy's to enroll in a 6-week pattern-making course at the community college in Albuquerque. It meant driving an hour each way twice a week, leaving the children with Mrs. Wilson on those evenings, but it was worth every mile. The instructor, Mrs. Grayson, had worked in New York's garment district before retiring to New Mexico. She took a special interest in my work, staying after class to show me techniques that weren't part of the standard curriculum. "You have a natural eye for structure," she told me. "Most beginners focus on the decorative elements, but you understand that the foundation, the cut, the fit, is what makes or breaks a garment." On the last day of class, she pulled me aside. "I have a proposition for you, Hazel. I consult for a small manufacturing company in Santa Fe that produces ready-to-wear clothing for department stores across the Southwest. They're looking for fresh designs for their spring collection, simple but distinctive pieces that can be produced at scale. Would you be interested in submitting some sketches?" My heart raced. This was an opportunity beyond anything I had imagined when I first walked into Dorothy's shop looking for fabric. But Santa Fe, that was where James now lived with Valerie and their children. The thought of traveling there, possibly running into them, made my stomach clench. Mrs. Grayson must have sensed my hesitation. "You wouldn't need to go there often. Maybe once a month for meetings. The rest could be done by mail." That evening, I sat on the porch swing, weighing the opportunity against my fear. The sun was setting over the mesa, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that no fabric could quite capture. From inside the house, I could hear David helping Rebecca with her reading, his patient voice guiding her through a Dr. Seuss book. My children were thriving despite everything. David had made the honor roll that spring. Sarah had conquered her shyness to perform in the school talent show. Even little Rebecca, who had been so confused by all the changes, was blossoming into a confident 5-year-old. They were resilient, adapting to our new reality. Could I do any less? The following week, I drove to Santa Fe with a portfolio of sketches and fabric swatches. I took a room at a small motel on the outskirts of town, far from the neighborhood where I knew James and Valerie lived. The meeting with Southwestern Apparel went better than I could have hoped. They loved my designs for simple, elegant dresses that incorporated elements of traditional Southwestern patterns in modern silhouettes. These would appeal to both tourists and locals, the production manager enthused. Traditional enough to feel authentic, but contemporary enough to be wearable in any city. They offered me a contract as a freelance designer, $200 per accepted design, with a minimum commitment of 10 designs for their spring line. It wasn't a fortune, but combined with my work at Dorothy's, it would give us financial stability I hadn't dared dream of a year earlier. As I drove back to Meadow Creek that evening, I found myself taking the long route, past the courthouse where my divorce from James had been finalized 3 months earlier. I pulled over and sat for a moment, looking at the imposing stone building where one chapter of my life had officially ended. A year ago, sitting in that parking lot, I had felt only grief and failure. Now, I felt something else. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The woman who had walked into that courthouse was defined by what she had lost. The woman driving home now was beginning to be defined by what she was creating. When I returned to Dorothy's designs the next day, Dorothea could tell something had changed. "You got the contract," she guessed, smiling at my barely contained excitement. "I did," I confirmed, "but I want you to know that I'm still committed to the shop. I can do both." She waved away my concern. Hazel, when you first came to work here, I saw a wounded bird with broken wings. Now I see a woman ready to fly." She paused, her expression turning serious. "But I have a proposal of my own." "What is it?" I asked, curious. "I'm thinking of retiring next year," she said. "My arthritis is getting worse, and my daughter in Arizona keeps asking me to move closer. I've been wondering what would happen to this place." She gestured around the small shop that had become my sanctuary. "How would you feel about taking it over?" I stared at her, stunned. "Dorothea, I couldn't possibly afford to buy the business." "Who said anything about buying it outright? We could work out a payment plan over years. You'd be doing me a favor, keeping my husband's legacy alive." The offer took my breath away. My own shop? The possibility had never entered my mind. But suddenly, I could see it, expanding beyond alterations and the few custom pieces we currently offered, perhaps carrying my own line alongside established brands, maybe even changing the name someday. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "It's a huge responsibility." Dorothea nodded understandingly. "Of course, but remember what I told you when you fixed that wedding dress? You have vision, Hazel. You see the potential in things and in yourself that others miss." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with possibilities. I got up and found myself standing in front of the mirror in my bathroom, really looking at myself for the first time in months. The woman who gazed back at me wasn't the same one who had discovered her husband's betrayal a year ago. There were new lines around my eyes, yes, and a few strands of silver in my brown hair that hadn't been there before. But there was also a steadiness in my gaze that was new, a certainty that hadn't existed before. My hands, resting on the edge of the sink, bore the tiny marks of my work. A callus where I held the scissors, a small scar from an errant pin. Fingertips slightly roughened from handling fabric day after day. These were not the hands of a victim. They were the hands of a creator, a provider, a woman who had found her voice through her craft. Hands that could build a future, stitch by careful stitch. I thought about what that future might look like. Taking over Dorothy's would mean deeper roots in Meadow Creek, the very place that had once felt like a cage of gossip and judgment. But it would also mean building something that was truly mine, something I could perhaps someday pass on to my daughters if they were interested. The freelance designing for Southwestern Apparel offered a different kind of opportunity. Connections to the wider world of fashion, a chance to see my creations worn by women across multiple states, the beginning of a name for myself beyond Meadow Creek's boundaries. Could I possibly do both? As I finally climbed back into bed, I realized that the question itself was a gift. A year ago, my only question had been how to survive the devastation of betrayal. Now, I was wondering how to choose between multiple paths forward. How to balance ambition with practicality. How to honor both my creative dreams and my responsibilities as a mother. I didn't have all the answers that night. But for the first time since James's double life had been revealed, I felt something that had been missing for too long. Hope. Not just the desperate hope of survival, but the expansive hope of possibility. My hands had found their purpose again, and in doing so, they had helped me find my voice. A voice that was no longer defined by what had happened to me, but by what I was creating for myself and my children. As I drifted off to sleep, I remembered something my grandmother used to say when teaching me to sew as a child. A good seamstress never fears having to undo her work and start again. Sometimes, the most beautiful garments come from fabrics that have been cut and restitched many times. Perhaps the same was true of lives as well. They say opportunity knocks only once. But I've found that isn't true. Sometimes opportunity whispers, nudging you gently toward a path you never imagined for yourself. The transition from employee to business owner wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a series of small, brave decisions that changed the course of my life, and eventually the lives of many women in our community. After much consideration, I accepted Dorothea's offer to take over her shop. We structured a 5-year payment plan that I could manage alongside my contract work with Southwestern Apparel. It was terrifying to sign those papers in the spring of 1974, committing myself to years of financial obligation. But as I held that pen, I thought of all the documents James had signed establishing our life together. and how easily those promises had been broken. This promise, I knew, was one I would keep. Dorothea stayed on for 6 months to help with the transition, teaching me the business side of running a shop, ordering inventory, managing accounts, dealing with suppliers. These were skills I'd never learned as a housewife, but I discovered I had a head for numbers and organization. All those years carefully managing our household budget had prepared me better than I realized. "You're a natural," Dorothea said one evening as we balanced the books. "Most creative types hate this part, but you seem to enjoy it." "I like the precision," I admitted. "In sewing and in bookkeeping, everything has to add up perfectly." When Dorothea finally retired and moved to Arizona to be near her daughter, I faced my first real test as a business owner. The shop had been Dorothy's Designs for 15 years. Her husband's name had been Harold, but he thought Dorothy sounded more appealing for a dress shop. Now I had to decide, keep the established name or create something new. After weeks of deliberation, I chose a middle path. I redesigned the sign and storefront to read, "Dorothy's by Hazel," honoring the shop's history while announcing its new direction. The day the new sign went up, I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I'd experienced before. This small storefront on Main Street was mine, not as James Whitaker's wife, but as Hazel, businesswoman and designer. The first year was a constant balancing act between running the shop, fulfilling my design contract with Southwestern Apparel, and raising 3 growing children. David was now 12 and increasingly independent, but Sarah at 10 and Rebecca at 6 still needed considerable attention. Many nights I would put them to bed, then work until midnight at my sewing machine in the spare bedroom I'd converted to a home studio. In those quiet midnight hours, with only the hum of the machine for company, I often reflected on how drastically my life had changed. There was exhaustion, yes, bone-deep weariness that sometimes brought me to tears. But there was also a fierce satisfaction in creating something that was entirely mine. Each receipt, each completed garment, each positive customer interaction was evidence that I was more than what had happened to me. The community's perception of me shifted gradually. I was no longer just poor Hazel whose husband had another family. I became Hazel who saved my daughter's prom dress, or Hazel who designed that beautiful outfit for the mayor's wife. My work spoke for me in ways that defending myself never could have. One pivotal moment came when Elaine Jenkins, the wife of Harold Jenkins, the bank manager who had denied my loan application, came into the shop looking for an outfit for her son's wedding. "Nothing in Albuquerque or Santa Fe seems right," she confessed, clearly uncomfortable to be seeking my help after her husband's dismissal of my business potential. "Margaret Wilson suggested that you could possibly—" "I'd be happy to design something for you, Mrs. Jenkins," I said, maintaining my professional composure. "When is the wedding?" By the end of that consultation, I had sketched a design for an elegant ensemble in a shade of blue that complemented her coloring perfectly. Something far more sophisticated than anything she would have found in the department stores. When she picked up the finished outfit a month later, her reaction was worth every stitch. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever worn," she said, turning before the mirror. "Harold won't believe it came from here in Meadow Creek." I smiled, resisting the urge to say what we both knew, that Harold had been wrong about my potential. Instead, I simply said, "I hope you'll recommend us to your friends, Mrs. Jenkins." She met my eyes in the mirror. "I already have." That fall, my designs for Southwestern Apparel appeared in stores across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Seeing my work, albeit without my name attached, in the Marshall Field's department store in Albuquerque was a surreal experience. I stood there watching as women browsed through racks containing my creations, occasionally pulling one out for a closer look. Some walked away, but others carried my dresses to the fitting rooms. Each selection felt like a personal validation. As the shop became more successful, I was able to hire part-time help, first just on Saturdays, then 3 afternoons a week. This allowed me to focus more on custom designs, which had become our most profitable area. Women were now traveling from neighboring towns specifically to have garments made by me. In early 1975, an unexpected visitor arrived at the shop, Lisa Jenkins, whose wedding dress I had altered during my first month working for Dorothea. She was visibly pregnant, and glowing with happiness. "I was hoping you could help me again," she said. "But this time, I need something that will grow with me for a few months, then something special for after the baby comes." As I took her measurements, she told me she'd returned to college after getting married and was about to complete her business degree. "It's not easy being the only woman in most of my classes," she confided. "I needed clothes that made me feel confident but still professional." Her words sparked an idea that had been forming in the back of my mind for months. There were more women like Lisa entering professional settings, college, offices, management positions, but the clothing options available to them were limited. Either hyper-feminine styles that weren't taken seriously or modified versions of men's business wear that obscured any hint of femininity. "What if," I suggested as I pinned fabric around her, "we created a line specifically for working women, professional but distinctly feminine, practical but beautiful?" Lisa's eyes lit up. "Women like me would buy every piece you made." That conversation led to a new direction for the shop. I began designing what I called the Career Collection, suits, dresses, and separates specifically for women entering the workforce. I used fabrics that traveled well, added practical details like hidden pockets, and ensured each piece could transition from day to evening with simple accessory changes. By mid-1976, we'd outgrown our small space on Main Street. The building next door, formerly a bookstore, became available, and after much deliberation and several sleepless nights worrying about the financial risk, I decided to expand. This time, when I went to the bank for a loan, I didn't meet with Harold Jenkins. I met with the regional manager from Albuquerque, bringing detailed financial statements showing the shop's growth over the past 2 years. "Impressive numbers, Mrs. Whitaker," he said, reviewing my paperwork. "You've more than doubled your revenue since taking over the business. And our growth potential is even greater with expanded space for inventory and a dedicated fitting area," I pointed out, showing him my business plan. I secured the loan, smaller than I'd hoped for, but enough to proceed with the expansion. The day we knocked down the wall between the two storefronts, creating one larger space, felt like a physical manifestation of how my life had expanded beyond the narrow confines I'd once accepted. The children were directly involved in the growth of the business. David, now 14, helped with bookkeeping after school, showing an aptitude for numbers that surprised me. Sarah, at 12, had her mother's eye for color and design, often offering opinions on fabric selections that proved remarkably astute. Even 9-year-old Rebecca contributed, charming customers with her detailed knowledge of inventory. "The blue one you're looking for is on the second rack, third from the left." They understood, in their different ways, that this business represented not just our livelihood, but our collective triumph over circumstances that might have broken a less determined family. The shop became the stable center around which our lives revolved, a source of pride and security. In the fall of 1977, I received a call from the editor of Southwestern Living magazine. They were planning a feature on women entrepreneurs in the region and wanted to include me. "Your journey from abandoned wife to successful business owner exemplifies the changing role of women in our society," the editor explained. "Would you be willing to tell your story?" 4 years earlier, I would have declined immediately, unwilling to revisit the painful collapse of my marriage in such a public forum. But now, I saw the potential value in sharing my experience. "Yes," I said, "but I want the focus to be on the business and what we're creating for women, not just on the personal tragedy that led me here." The article appeared in their January 1978 issue, a 4-page spread with photographs of the shop, my designs, and me standing proudly with my children. The headline read, "Threading New Paths, How Hazel Whitaker Stitched Together Success After Heartbreak." The response was overwhelming. Women from across the Southwest wrote to share how my story had inspired them, how they too were rebuilding lives after divorce, widowhood, or other personal setbacks. Many asked for advice on starting businesses of their own. These letters planted another seed in my mind, one that would take several more years to fully germinate. Women needed more than just clothing designed for their changing roles. They needed support, guidance, and practical knowledge about navigating the business world. In 1980, I took another risk. I converted the apartment above the shop, which we'd been using for storage, into a meeting space called the cutting room. There, twice a month, I began hosting workshops for women interested in entrepreneurship. We covered topics like securing loans, negotiating with suppliers, marketing strategies, and balancing business with family responsibilities. The first workshop had just 8 attendees. Within 6 months, we had a waiting list, with women driving from as far as Santa Fe and Albuquerque to participate. I brought in guest speakers, accountants, lawyers, marketing professionals, all women who were blazing their own trails in traditionally male fields. This initiative expanded into a formal mentorship program, where established businesswomen, including myself, guided newcomers through their first year of operation. By 1985, we had helped launch 27 women-owned businesses in northern New Mexico, from bakeries to bookkeeping services to a women's health clinic. Looking back from where I sit now at 79, I can trace the progression from that devastating day in 1973, when I discovered James's betrayal, to the rewarding life I've built since then. The shop, now called simply Hazel's, has been a fixture on Main Street for over 4 decades. I've scaled back my day-to-day involvement, with Sarah taking over most of the management responsibilities. She has her own vision for the future, incorporating online sales and contemporary designs while maintaining our commitment to quality and personal service. David became an accountant and handles the financial side of our now diversified business interests, which include a small manufacturing facility that produces our signature career collection for boutiques throughout the Southwest. Rebecca, my sensitive youngest, surprised us all by getting a law degree, specializing in helping women navigate divorce and establish businesses of their own. As for James, we eventually developed a civil relationship for the sake of our children. He remained in Santa Fe with Valerie and their children, maintaining regular visitation with David, Sarah, and Rebecca. Years later, he told me that losing our family was the greatest regret of his life. I believe him, but I've also come to recognize that his betrayal, painful as it was, pushed me toward a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one I might have lived in the comfortable shadow of his protection. The women who come to my workshops often ask if I'm angry about the years I spent as just a housewife before being forced to find my own path. I tell them no. Those years gave me my children, taught me to manage a household economy, and developed the patience and attention to detail that would later serve me well in business. What I do regret is how long it took our society to value women's economic contributions. How many other potential entrepreneurs, inventors, and business leaders remained hidden behind the title of housewife because they never had, or never took, the opportunity to discover their capabilities. That's why, even in my later years, I've continued advocating for women's economic empowerment. The mentorship program has grown into a formal incubator for women-owned businesses, funded partly through a foundation I established with a portion of our company's profits. Last year, we provided seed grants to 15 startups across the state. Sometimes in the evening, I sit on my porch overlooking the garden I've finally had time to nurture in my semi-retirement, and I think about that terrified young woman who drove away from her life with 3 children and half a savings account. I wish I could tell her what I know now, that the unraveling of what she thought was her life's purpose would reveal a stronger, more resilient core that had been there all along, waiting to emerge. I've learned that resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about what you choose to build from the broken pieces. In my case, what began as necessity became passion, then purpose, and finally legacy. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch, choice by choice, I wove a new life from the unraveled fabric of the old one. And in doing so, I discovered that sometimes the most beautiful creations emerge from patterns we never planned to follow. My name is Hazel Whitaker, and this is not just a story of betrayal and heartbreak. It's a story of reinvention, of finding strength where I thought there was only weakness, of building a community where I once feared isolation. It's the story of how I transformed from being defined by my relationship to others, wife, mother, victim, to defining myself through my own creations and contributions. And perhaps most importantly, it's a reminder that it's never too late to pick up the scissors, cut a new pattern, and begin again. You know, sharing my story with all of you today has brought back so many memories, both painful and beautiful. If my journey has touched your heart or inspired you in any way, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel. These old hands have sewn thousands of garments over the years, but now they're just as happy clicking that like button to support these wonderful videos. And don't forget to tap that little bell icon too, darlings. At my age, I've learned not to miss the important things in life, and I'd hate for you to miss any of these stories of resilience and hope. After all, we older folks have so many lessons to share if you're willing to listen. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Until next time, remember that your life's fabric is always in your hands to reshape, no matter how torn it might seem.